Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll start in 20-30 seconds. We'll just leave a bit of time for the hundreds of participants to join us, and then we'll give it a go. Okay. Numbers are still going up, but they're stabilizing. So let's give it a start. Welcome to all of you. My name is Aziza Akmouche. I'm heading at the OECD, the division that works on cities, urban policies, and sustainable development, where the program on a territorial approach to the sustainable development goals, led by my colleague Stefano Marta, is located. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you all to this second day of the fourth OECD Roundtable on cities and regions for the SDGs, which we're delighted to co-host this edition with the EU Committee of the Regions. We had yesterday opening remarks from Thomas Woben, who's coordinating the legislative works at the EU Committee of the Regions, and we had a very fruitful session yesterday, launching 3 different reports from the OECD on a territorial approach to the SDGs in Cordoba, Argentina, Paraná, Brazil, and also in Kitakyushu, Japan. And we also discussed at length findings from a recent survey we have carried out jointly with the Committee of the Regions on how cities and regions are actually aligning their recovery strategy with the SDGs universal targets in the medium term. Today's session will look in particular at the topic of city-to-city partnerships and how these partnerships can help localize and achieve the sustainable development goals. And we'll have the second part of the session today zooming on the role of universities to support cities and regions in that effort. And I'll be delighted to moderate the first part of this webinar, and then my colleague Raffaele Trapasso will take over for the discussion around universities' role. Before I begin, quick usual announcements. First to say, and you've seen it, that the roundtable is recorded, that it will be made available, this recording on the OECD's webpage later this week, that we have several hundreds of participants registered, so we'll try to keep this as lively as we can, and we invite you all to be active on social media. You can see the Twitter handle on the screen. If you wish to know more about our work on a territorial approach to the SDGs, you also have the link to the program's webpage and to the online data set. And as you may know, we will have at the end of the session a recap on the next steps and how we take this all forward. Let's start now with the first part of the session, which is on city-to-city partnerships to achieve the sustainable development goals. And just to give you a bit of background, as OECD and with our colleagues from UN Habitat, represented today by our colleague and friend Shipra, we've been supporting the G20 Development Working Group as part of the G20 Italian Presidency in shaping a set of high-level principles on city-to-city partnerships. The objective is really to build on the state of the art in terms of city-to-city partnerships, decentralized development cooperation, as some of you may know and experience it, and to provide some inspiration for G20 countries and beyond to strengthen their policies in this field. And it's my pleasure to introduce today our first speaker, Mr. Francesco Rampa, who's senior expert on sustainable development and food systems and G20 Senior Sherpa Expert Member within the Prime Minister's Office of the Italian Presidency. Francesco will share in about 10 minutes the current state of play of these principles, and we will then open the floor for some questions and some feedback from you all on how we can help fine-tune them, knowing that they're now in the stage of consultation with G20 member countries. So Francesco, if you agree, you have the floor for a good 10 minutes. And to all the attendees, please share any question you may have throughout Francesco's presentation via the Q&A icon of the Zoom. Francesco, you have the floor. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thanks to you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thanks to the OECD for inviting me. I sit and represent the Prime Minister's office in the Development Working Group. And as you have seen from the program, we are indeed developing as one of the key priorities for the Italian presidency this year, a set of high-level principles on city-to-city partnerships and a bit more. But I wanted to start by mentioning why would the Prime Minister's office feel so this issue to be so important. And that is really the reason both for me to sit in the Development Working Group, but I guess also the reason why I was asked to give the speech. The issue is really political. In fact, the Italian presidency is looking at the issue of sustainable development goals as a key priority. You know that people, prosperity, and planet is the motto of the Italian G20 presidency. And we are looking for a role of the G20 to lead really the acceleration towards the SDGs, despite the pandemic. And partly, but a very important part of a more sustainable and resilient future goes through the cities. So what the G20 Italian presidency is really putting forward is a political point that the G20 wants to make on the importance of rethinking the role of cities in development and making sure that SDGs indeed are localized, much more close to the ground, involving citizens. In fact, the Development Working Group, I will say more about the high-level principles and what we're trying to do, but it is not the only working group under the Italian G20 presidency that deals with cities. You know, the Development Working Group speaks of, in fact, partnerships with the developing countries. But even just for the G20 cities themselves, the Italian presidency has put this item on the agenda of the Climate Sustainability Working Group, how G20 cities themselves can contribute to climate action, on the Environmental Ministers and Working Group, promoting circular cities in the G20 countries, as well as the Digital Economy Task Force. So the G20 is trying to look at ways for, in particular, public procurement, information technology to foster sustainable development. So our plan is, in really most of the policy areas where the G20 is working this year under our presidency, we want to put forward a more sustainable city as a core of involving the citizens into SDGs, both in the north and the south of the world. We hope that by doing this, then our leaders, at the end of October, we will have the Heads of State Summit in Rome, will then give this political message to the world after the different ministers in their own thematic areas have thought through and worked at the technical level, also with our senior officials like me, towards a new model where cities are at the center, a new model for resilient and sustainable development. Then the leaders give this message to the world. Last year, at the end of last year, there was an article on Nature, for the first time, collecting data worldwide, showing that the artificial mass on Earth has for the first time surpassed the total biomass. We have built more things, including in the cities, especially in the cities, but also, you know, roads and all the material we artificially produce. Actually, that's much more now than all the biomass in the world. That's really a striking, shocking feature. And we want to make sure that we put urban planning and in the context of the SDGs, another model of cities. And that's why the G20 Development Working Group in particular is looking at intermediary cities. We need cities that are closer in dimension to the human being. We need cities that can provide services, and we need to avoid repeating the errors of the past, giving incentives, especially to the youth everywhere in the world, to migrate. We know that there is a reason why megalopolises are mega, because they provide especially job opportunities and services, etc. So we need to revert the trend, otherwise we will make, as they are today, unfortunately, the big cities the center of greenhouse gases emission, destruction of nature and planetary boundaries, etc., etc. So having said that, really is a political message that we want a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future that leaves no one and no place behind. I have just come back right now from the Matera, the city of Matera in Italy, where in fact the ministers of development of the G20 got together, and in their communique, which you can find online on the G20 Presidency website, they have recognized very importantly that the local authorities are absolutely crucial to mitigate the complex and multifaceted impacts of the pandemic, and are key to build forward better. The ministers have also committed to work at all levels of government to support local authorities to lead these efforts towards sustainable and resilient recovery, with a particular view on addressing climate change, but also the importance of cities for rural-urban linkages and food systems transformation, as well as taking post-COVID services and One Health approach to post-COVID and health services and post-COVID recovery pandemic. I will explain briefly the status of our work. The ministers have recognized all of this politically, and then they lead the development working group. We've already, senior officials, developed some high-level principles that really is the point today. I will mention these high-level principles, and I very much look forward to your comments, because this is supposed to be an inclusive process. However, before I mention some of the ideas we have on the high-level principles for city-to-city partnerships, I also want to say that the G20 Development Working Group is preparing a platform, because we are bringing this innovative topic of intermediary cities to the fore of the international community and multilateralism, but we need to keep doing it. So we are launching, hopefully by the end of the year, a G20 platform on the role of intermediary cities. And we are doing this with the key assistants. In fact, they will act as a secretariat. That's the plan. Both the OECD and UN Habitat would be the platform for this network of networks. It's not a new institution, is a platform that should do policy analysis, promote policy dialogue, and enhance what a lot of existing networks of cities are already doing very, very importantly. We want to enhance and scale up what these cities-to-city partnership are doing all over the world, and I'm making sure that through a G20 platform, the topic remains not only under this year Italian presidency, but in the future also at the center of international attention. And we hope the platform can achieve that. And the platform should, first of all, define what are important principles and inspiring examples from the existing cities-to-city partnerships.
I think we are not hearing you any longer. Francesco, maybe something changed in your
yeah, sorry.
Now it's good. Go ahead.
So the principles I was mentioning that should be spearheaded by this platform that should be launched by the end of the year are say around 9, but I will make sure I just mention them quickly. First of all, of course, every city-to-city partnership should really be focused on a territorial approach to development. That's crucial, especially in a pandemic, post-pandemic world, where we know the importance of territorial development more broadly. We need to strengthen multi-level governance and coordination. So, of course, cities-to-city partnerships are at the center of territorial development, but should be very clearly and much better coordinate with different levels of government, from provinces to district to region to national level government, of course. They should be city-to-city partnership based on very much on cooperation and lessons learned, reciprocity and peer-to-peer learning, So cities should help each other in urban planning in particular. Another principle is, of course, that capacity development and should be at the center. So those who have gone further should help others follow certain lessons learned and adapt them to the local context. A seventh principle is the importance of inclusiveness and making sure that territorial networks build really on the presence and the input of everyone. There should be a way also city-to-city partnership to mainstream SDG indicators into planning. So granular data to assess territorial disparity and make better planning is a seventh principle. An eighth principle is the centrality of effective financing. There's a lot that must happen in terms of channeling much more resources to the city-to-city partnership, to the territorial level. And lastly, but absolutely not the least, the importance of having a strong monitoring framework so that city-to-city partnership become evidence-based. Now, I want to stress this last one, maybe in particular, and seek comments on it, because the principles should really be shared. That's why we are here, and we thank the OECD to help us at the presidency to hear feedback, and we will continue preparing and improving the principle. They must be owned by everyone, by all the stakeholders. We must really build on what exists. So help from existing networks and existing initiatives on cities to help us. And also we must use the principle and the platform itself to keep G20 and the international community accountable when we and everyone say that cities are now so important. And in the context of these three dimensions, I want to mention that I also, I am seconded now to the Prime Minister's office from the European Center for Development Policy Management. So I know very well the case of Europe. Europe has, for example, European Union has a program, 165 million, if I'm not mistaken, to support city-to-city partnerships. And with the OECD, DG INSPA and others, we are willing to help monitoring and lessons learned and do better policies out of lessons learned. For example, what the European Union is already doing to support European cities partnership with other cities in the world. And this is very important because we must make a result orientation of all city-to-city partnership. Otherwise, there is no point in making them the protagonist of SDG implementation. We need a role of independent thinking and knowledge institute in all of this. We need to give the possibility of criticizing sometimes the public choices. So it is very important that city-to-city partnership think of what's not being achieved through a monitoring framework and through the voice of those who are marginal normally in policy making. And thirdly, the importance of political economy. We need to think that certain things don't happen in SDG localization because there are political and economic bottlenecks. So also political economy thinking in implementing cities-to-cities partnership is absolutely crucial. I thank you very much for this. There's much more to say, but I look forward to receiving some feedback on this principle and the help from everyone to making sure these principles are useful and shared widely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesco Rampa from the Italian Presidency, the Prime Minister's Office, and taking us through some of the content of those principles. We actually have a slides that capture the 9 principles as they've currently been put on the table and are being discussed by the members of the development working group. We'll get into a panel discussion shortly whereby you'll have the opportunity to hear some feedback, including from 3 countries that are represented in this, or members that are represented in this working group, France, Germany, the European Union, and of course from Habitat through SHIPRA. But before that, maybe we'll give a chance to the audience to ask questions if you have on the scope of the principles, the topics that you capture, the process. If need be, please ask questions via the Q&A function, and I'll take a question or 2. Maybe to get us started, Francesco, if you agree, I would have 2 questions for you actually, and one of them links to the point that you made about this initiative being a sort of a catalyst or a means to amplify efforts that are already underway. in terms of localizing the SDGs and raising the profile of city-to-city partnerships. You mentioned DG INPA, and we'll hear from the European Commission in a while. We know the Urban 20 group that was also set up under the Argentinian presidency aimed to go increasingly local in this G20 agenda. There are many city networks, umbrella organizations that are driving also this agenda. How do you see the role of G20 member countries in their country in particular, you know, in connecting these dots? That would be very helpful for us to get the guidance and what you expect as an incentive to align all these planets in this localization agenda. Maybe I'll let you go through this first question, and then I would have one that is more specific to intermediary city.
Thank you. Yes, the role of the G20 governments and the national level is absolutely central. It is not obvious to SDG localization, I think, is shared. The ministers have just confirmed that in Matera, but making it happen is not easy. There's a lot of regulatory, legislative, even cultural resistances, inertia to make a multi-governance system following the principle of subsidiarity, which makes a lot of sense to everyone, but making it real encounters a lot of bureaucratic inertia. So I think the governments and the members of the G20 first, but every government in general should be really making this a commitment that of course needs to be implemented over years. It's not something that can happen in 2022 just because now the Italian presidency has put it clearly on the agenda of the G20. So we need to make sure that exactly there is a willingness to follow through. There is this attention to learn from what has already been done. A lot of countries are more advanced than others on devolution. We need to support the southern part of the world. I remind African countries where certain of this devolution has been even enshrined in the constitution, like in Kenya, but there are a lot of resistances on how to do it. So that's why we need a centrality of the conversation, and we need someone like the G20 that is a place for continuously discussing this in a policy dialogue. That's why I see the centrality of the governments coming regularly together at least once a year to say, okay, that trend is happening, but we must refocus efforts, etc., etc. So to me, the centrality of the member states and the central governments is absolutely crucial.
Good, thank you very much. I'll raise a question from the chat to you in a while. Maybe before that, the interesting focus on intermediary cities, which I think in this post-pandemic period is also very timely, because what we've seen in a number of paradigm shifts with the rise of teleworking and digitalization and the shift towards accessibility and the greater, you know, environmental awareness and citizen engagement on that front is that those intermediary cities that are located nearby, you know, large metro agglomeration areas have actually a big card to play. And we've been with Habitat and many others very vocal that you need a national urban policy that drives this quality urbanization that is more polycentric than large metropolitan areas scattered throughout the territories. Maybe if you could elaborate more on this choice, you know, to emphasize in particular these intermediary cities and the way you see national governments, you know, role in driving those rural-urban linkages as well, and how these sets of principles can help, because that's quite a very high-level impetus you are giving to this conversation on cities of all sizes.
Yes, without making any strict definition, that's absolutely not the purpose. There's no one-fits-all approach. Of course, intermediary city in China has a totally different physical and spatial dimension compared to a territorial, to an intermediary city in Italy. So we don't want to force anyone to adopt a necessary definition. And yet, as I said at the very beginning, it's a matter of a sustainability model. We know that today already most of the people live in cities. Is projected to increase a lot. 70% of greenhouse gas emission come from cities. So it is really refocusing the dimension of our way of living together that in itself should really spur more economic, social, and environmental sustainability together, simply by looking at the way we can take care of our planet of our economy in a way that is simply more suitable to the planetary boundaries that we have. So first of all, it's a political message to focus on intermediary cities. And secondly, it is also an issue of supporting the urban-rural linkages in terms of, if you want, and to be brief, in a food economy sense. There is so much inequality in services, in economic opportunities between rural and urban areas, which is behind many of the trends, that we need to rebalance that. And intermediary cities are typically in the spatial continuum from remote areas to the capitals, if you want, to the big cities, are those that can keep young people and citizens happy because they are in between two remote areas and two crowded areas. So intermediary cities are really the way, especially in the southern part of the world with the food economy in mind, the place where you can create more economic opportunities by offering connectivity services, bringing in particular food and to the processing area that has to be intermediary, not only the large peripheries and urban and peri-urban part, to then the larger part of the citizenship who are in the city. So it is also an area of continuum strengthening and making it more sustainable in the way we provide food. A lot of it is about food. We provide food to a growing world population.
Great, thank you very much. And I think that responds to one of the questions that was raised on the typology of territories, and indeed this idea that we are no longer in a dichotomy where you have cities and then rural. There is this continuum in between, where actually a good chunk of the population, about 24% from the work we've done in the degree of urbanization with 5 international organizations, lives, and therefore the role of intermediary cities as connectors therein is relevant. Maybe a last question for you, Francesco, from the Q&A. There's a point made about the role that enterprises and firms basically can play in these city-to-city partnerships. It's true, we've been focusing a lot on how national governments can drive this localization of development cooperation at large, and we'll hear from national governments representatives and how they're making decentralized development cooperation work in their countries. We've seen the bottom-up effect of how cities themselves are championing these partnerships and the rise of city diplomacy. Do you see a role in the private sector, I mean, you know, firms of all sizes, in driving these partnerships between different cities? And is this something that is captured or not by the group and the principles as they're being shaped now?
Yes, absolutely. That's what we mean when we say that this has to be an inclusive and a multi-stakeholder process. Absolutely. Of course, when I speak of services and helping citizens being happy where they are, there's a lot of it which has to be public services, public objectives, orientation. So a lot has to come from the government. But absolutely, the private sector and the enterprises of every size are absolutely crucial to make this connectivity I mentioned happen. There is no way we can succeed in achieving a different size of our way of living together, as I said, if there is no economic incentive for the citizen, and in particular the youth, to stay in areas that are not just megalopolis. We must have the enterprises see the economic opportunity, often profit making without any problem, of course, in making sure that they help develop the territory, that they make that connection between megalopolis and rural areas. There is a lot of economic opportunity behind this philosophy of the intermediary city. So we must absolutely learn from a lot of SMEs that already are for many years, in fact, in many countries doing this, and give them more opportunities to hire more people, to use technology and IT to develop their own production and services in intermediary areas, without making our peripheries just conglomerates of production. So absolutely, we want to hear, we must engage. Maybe we haven't done it yet as part of this work of the presidency, but in the way forward, when we look for ideas on how to do it better, when we finalize the principle, we must clearly include businesses and SMEs in particular in the southern part of the world in the group of stakeholders that help us lead this initiative.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much, Francesco Rampa. Stay with us. We're now shifting to the second part of this first session, getting into the panel. I will be introducing some of the panelists progressively. There's one question just for our 5 panelists to keep in mind, maybe when you respond to the first set of questions. I'll ask from the chat, which I find interesting, which is how we combine this SDGs localization implementation effort by cities and regions with the national framework and political support that is provided to the SDGs at large. I mean, in a sense, can we have a localization of the SDGs in a country where we don't necessarily have this national framework and drive? You will tell us more about that in a second. So we have 5 panelists. We'll have 2 rounds of questions. This is to invite you all to continue to ask your questions via the Q&A to the specific panelists. We'll have a moment in between the 2 rounds and at the end to address some of these, and we'll ask the panelists to the extent possible to be short and sharp, 3 minutes each to address the question. And it's my pleasure to start with Christine Moreau. Christine Moreau is the ambassador and head of delegation for external action of local authorities within the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. And we've seen, Christine, in the case of France, how you've been raising the profile of city-to-city partnerships and the way decentralized development cooperation is very important in the development cooperation activities of France. So my question to you is, how does this contribute to achieving the SDGs, maybe in the country, in France, but also in your partner countries, and have these city-to-city partnerships evolved basically after the SDGs were adopted? Christine, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Let me start with reminding that for local authorities in France, there was an important moment, which was 2015 and the COP21, because at that time they took part very much to the debate. They mobilized themselves, and I think it was a start which changed their view on these questions. And of course, it was the same year, as you know, in which the SDGs were adopted by the General Assembly of United Nations. Actually, I think it was less difficult for the local authorities in France to integrate the SDGs in their international cooperation, maybe, than in their local domestic policies. Because even before, the topics they were addressing in their cooperation were very much in line with SDGs. The first topic, which is popular among the French local authorities, is access to water and sanitation. And there are also fight against poverty, food production, health, education, and of course, the fight against climate change since 2015. So they were practicing SDGs in their international cooperation. It was maybe a bit more difficult to integrate the vocabulary and the grid, the interpretation grid with all the SDGs. But in a way, the practice in international cooperation helped them also to adopt this this grid in their domestic policies. I would like to make a reference to our recent. Not recent, because it's still in the final phases of Parliament adoption. We have a new law which is going to be adopted this summer on development based on the SDGs. We find this reference in all the pages of the law, and it gives an important acknowledgement to the role of local governments in international cooperation. In particular, they are obliged to make a report every year about the way they implement themselves in their domestic policies and in their international cooperation, the SDGs. Well, if I have to be short, this is the main things I'd like to stress at that.
Thank you very much, Christine. I think it's extremely interesting to see how maybe easier it was to mainstream the SDGs lens and framework in the decentralized development activities, because they were already relating, as you said, to core goals, whether it's water or climate or gender and so on, and how then this provided a sort of impetus, let's say, to reflect that into the domestic policy also of local and regional governments. I think it's a very interesting process that probably other countries can also add to. Thank you. We'll get back to you later on the G20 proposed sets of principles in particular to secure comments, but let me now turn to our second speaker, and my pleasure to introduce Nicole Hoffmann from BMZ, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. You're Senior Policy Officer within the Federal States and Local Authorities Division. Nicole, we've been doing a lot of work together, including on decentralized development cooperation. And what I'd like to ask you here is if you could share a bit your experience around this decentralized development cooperation activities, and how in particular you're using this as a mechanism to incentivize from the federal level this coordination with German states and municipalities. Nicole, you have the floor.
If you allow me, I just need one clarification question, because I was given 2 questions and I actually thought it would be 3 minutes each. So
that's it. So you address the first one here, and then we'll have a second round on the second one.
Wonderful. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm talking on behalf of the division that is responsible in the BMZ for decentralized development cooperation. We are convinced that achieving the SDGs requires a wide range of actors and a clear strategy of who is doing what. We are very committed in the localizing SDGs in the North-South cooperation, and we see the advantages as where our system is intrinsically organized by the subsidiarity level. So we very much support this idea of subsidiarity also in development cooperation. This also includes peer learning, but of course one of the questions is how to organize and how to harmonize it. We've started in 2012 with a small budget of 7 million euros to support city-to-city partnerships and to establish a special agency that supports the German municipalities in doing so. The budget has grown up to a budget of more than 80 million euros this year. And municipalities and their partners in the Global South are offered different capacity building programs. They can apply for funding for projects that they will then implement together. Yeah, one aspect or one challenge that we see is that ensuring quality and impact is something that we need to look into, because many actors also have many different levels of providing their deliverables. And we do have, as a donor, we also have the responsibility to look into this issue. We very much also see that the harmonization on a vertical level is necessary. And we have looked in our specific federal system that may be a bit different to other systems, that the federal states are the perfect intermediaries to coordinate in the vertical line. The federal states in the German system have the responsibility for a certain coordination of municipalities and cities, which does not affect their autonomous government planning. So for this, I would leave it for now. We are looking into harmonizing this and strengthening. At the moment we're looking into more than 470 municipal partnerships that we are supporting in this particular line, and we are supporting all federal states in this budget line, in this special cooperation for joint implementation of cooperation with the federal states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Very interesting to see how city-to-city partnerships are used as a vertical alignment tool. And did you say 18 or 80 for the budget? 80. So that's a multiplication by almost 10. I think that that gives a very strong signal, and over 400 partnerships you're working on. That's very impressive. Thank you very much. Let me now turn to our next speaker, and I'm delighted to introduce Imme Scholz. You're the co-chair of the Independent Group of Scientists for the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report. It's my understanding, Imme, that the next edition of the report will focus on this discussion around SDGs localization. And I was wondering how you are featuring, if you are featuring the city-to-city partnerships and connecting to the recovery strategies at local and national level. Imme, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I hope you hear me well.
Okay. Yes, we do.
Great. Yes, well, we started to work with a new independent group of scientists for the next GSDR only for a few months. So that means that we don't have, we are actually now in the moment elaborating our outline and our key messages for the next GSDR, also for briefing at the upcoming high-level political forum. And of course, we have to consider the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we are living through this process, we see that the impact won't be limited in time. It will probably last longer, and it will be very felt very differently at different local levels. So in that sense, I perfectly understand your point about connecting about localizing or saying that our report should have a local or territorial approach to in its analysis and in its recommendations to member states. But we are not there yet. So we are identifying the topics and about the scales we want to focus on. We have not actually discussed, and therefore I took this opportunity of being here with you actually as also a learning opportunity, and to reinforce that and bring it into the debate we are going to have actually tomorrow and on Friday. What we have seen is that we will probably look not only at the impact of COVID-19, but also new trends such as climate neutrality. Climate neutrality, this trend which is covering now so many countries that it approaches 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. If that is really moving forward, it will attract a lot of political energy and of economic energy, and it will have to happen in cities too. And so we have to see the relationship between that trend and sustainable development from a broader lens, which is exactly one of the reasons why we have the Global Sustainable Development Report. And the other perspective is, you might remember from the previous report, the levers which have to be put to work for implementing the SDGs and for ensuring coherence and for dealing with this, with vested interests and with the path dependency And these levels, they cover STI policies, they cover economic and financial policy, but they also cover individual and collective action and multi-level governance at different levels. So this shows that it is important to look at cities as important areas of action, and where a lot of needs are expressed, where a lot of competence is, depending on the governance arrangements, how strong the principle of subsidiarity actually is in each national context. But I think that's exactly, we have to have a stronger view on how this multi-level governance arrangements actually work, and whether they favor local implementation, and where actually more coordination, vertical coordination, as Mrs. Hoffman was also saying, is needed for ensuring coherence and avoiding, I really like that term by Mr. Rampa, leaving no place behind. So not only leaving no one behind, but leaving no place behind. So to avoid that localization leads to stronger also territorial inequalities, and I think these inequalities, you already have them very much in many countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ime. Very clear that this is work in progress, and that you're fine-tuning a bit the approach, that there will be a focus on COVID-19 recovery and special attention to different scales. And I hope the conversations today will provide some food for thought in terms of how and where to prioritize. And we do see indeed through the mega trend of climate change that you emphasized, and keeping in mind that most people actually work and live in cities, huge local implications, but also levers for action in terms of responding to these global transformations of our world. So thank you very much. Let me now turn to our next speaker from DG INTPA at the European Commission, and my pleasure to introduce Marlene Holzner, the head of unit at this DG. We know in INTPA you have a dedicated program to actually promote integrated urban development through partnerships among local authorities. You've been among the first ones within the European Commission to actually pledge for increased role of local authorities. Can you elaborate a bit more on the rationale and background of this program? We're working together, analyzing and monitoring 16 of these city-to-city partnerships. And if you can say a few words as well, as I know this is high on your agenda, on how you see SDG 17 in particular, which is devoted to partnerships as a prerequisite to achieve the other goals. Marlene, you have the floor. So Marlene, I'm not hearing you. Maybe if you're taking the floor now, you're on mute. Now is good. You have the floor.
I know we are among of us, and we all agree that really the bulk of the SDGs, we cannot achieve without the local and the regional governments being really involved. And figures say, and this is evidence-based, that it is 65%, more than half. There, it's clear that we talk not only about the public infrastructure, about local development, we talk about sustainable economy, everything where the local authorities are involved. And we just believe that to have the local and the regional governments in our partner countries involved and really actively working on that, the best help we can give them is through the city-to-city partnership, or let's call it decentralized cooperation. Why? Because it is in essence a partnership where we as the European Commission treat the European local authorities as partners, and we also treat the local authority in the partner countries as partners, and they thrive. Why? Because what happens is that the initiative with whom to have this peer-to-peer partnership, it comes from them. What kind of partnership, where they want to cooperate this peer-to-peer, they will decide. And from what comes from us is then the financing. And we just believe that also throughout this, the European local authorities, they can have an added value, in the sense of it's a different thing if a consultant comes gets a lot of money, and then he implements a water management system. Compared to a European local authority, a city who has, themselves experimented, encountered obstacles which are typical for public administration, and can pass on that also to the other city in a partner country. Now, the whole city-to-city approach has a long history. It has not been invented by us. We have been financing it for quite a year. And that's why, with the help of the OECD, we wanted to look into it deeper and really see what is the quantitative and the qualitative added value of that. Out of which came a report that the OECD you have delivered to us in 2018, completely reconfirming the really essential role of the local authority. We have then thought, on this basis, maybe we change a little bit the approach, and we want to centralize the money we dedicate to that in Brussels and have, a big program rather than having every delegation in the partner country doing its own little program. And this is the partnership program we are talking about, which is, in terms of the money, we're talking 164.7 million for the period 2018 and 2020. And it is in the logic, really that what I explained before, that the cities, the local authorities, they apply. They have, of course, to show who is the partner and what they want to work on. We have, of course, in all these calls, put what our main priorities are as the European Commission. But it's good government, it's Green Deal, it's growth, job creation, digitalization, as well as migration. So all, the objectives, everything that it's SDG in essence. It doesn't work on a rotating basis, but we do calls. So basically one call where we say, look, cities can apply. The last one we have launched only on the 8th of March this year. And we had a huge response. And I think this is also clear why, because it's not only the need from the city in the partner country, but we also know that cities and local authorities around in Europe, they don't have the financing to do this with their own pockets. That's not possible. So they greatly answer to our call, and we are just in the process of analyzing all the different concepts and then attributing the money. Unfortunately, in the next period, this program as such will not continue because there will be no global initiative managed in Brussels on this one. So we a little bit go back to the old model where this can be done at the partner country level with the money which will be attributed to the partner countries. But of course, we in the headquarters, we follow that and try really to continue with this decentralized cooperation. Also, arguing and justifying, what good effects that have.
Good.
The second point, and then I finish, is
I invite you, yes, please, to wrap up. Thank you.
Partnership it's also like embodied, I would say, in our general approach. That our name was changed in DG IMPA. And we very much, in the framework partnerships with the local authorities, embrace and implement this principle. And they are also part of our Team Europe initiative, where there will be a kind of web portal where member states, but also private entities, companies, they can say what they would like to do, which financing they have. On the other side, those who would like to implement. So in this kind of bigger, not European Commission, but European Commission, member states, other actors, including local authority, there's a platform where this decentralized cooperation can function without us, doing always the financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene, and indeed for stressing how you've helped also shift this perspective of decentralized development cooperation for being only financial transfer from donor to recipient countries into something that is more a partnership. And I think the change of your Directorate General's name is a very good signal in this direction. There's lots of questions on the program, and maybe I'll get back to you in between the two rounds. But let me now turn to our last speaker in this first round, Shipra Narang Suri, who is the Chief of the Urban Practice Branch at UN Habitat. Shipra, you've been very vocal also within UN Habitat about the need to combine local and national action in advancing this 2030 agenda. Hand in hand with the new urban agenda, where do you see the role here for the localization and the territorial approach to the SDGs?
Thanks, Aziza, and really pleasure to listen to everybody just now. I think there's so many different perspectives and so many important ones and such important work going on. So thank you. You know, localization, we've been saying, and as was just said, that we're not going to be achieving the SDGs or implementing the new urban agenda or achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement without really looking at local. But going local does not mean that local authorities can do it alone. And that is something that I want to sort of re-emphasize up front, that this is really within the framework of a multi-level governance approach, where national governments have to play the role of enablers, of coordinators, as was just said, in some ways, of conveners, and in our work on national urban policy, Aziza, as the overarching national policy framers in an inclusive fashion. And only then within that context is really when local governments can play a major role in accelerating the progress towards the SDGs. I want to focus on one dimension. You know, we all talk about SDG localization, and that's where I'll frame the partnership, is the discussion. We all talk about SDG localization, but what is SDG localization? You know, is it really about just an interpretation of the SDGs at the local level? And that's what we call SDG localization. For us at UN Habitat, and a lot of reflection has gone into this also with you guys in the preparation for the G20 and the whole conversation around Local 2030, which is happening at the UN system-wide level. First of all, that everybody embraces the SDGs, which means that everybody understands the SDGs, and which means that everybody agrees that these are the guiding framework for development going forward. And that everybody is national down to local, down to community. And there's a big role there in terms of advocacy and communications and education and orientation, which is a major element that city-to-city partnerships can contribute to. Big one. You know, they learn from peers and champions elsewhere much more than cities learn from anyone else. The second part of SDG localization is really policy, planning, and budgetary alignment. Everything that we do at the local level should be aligned to the SDGs in some way. And that requires normative support, that requires guidance, that requires tools, that requires us going beyond the city-to-city partnerships. And that's where the international work of OECD and UN Habitat and others comes into play. A third dimension is project alignment. Investment towards the SDGs, you know, projects that are assessed to be SDG impact oriented and that are funded, and then you can match funding with these projects. And this is where the private sector comes in, and you provide facilitation to the private sector. And there was a question, I think, in the chat around localization and city-to-city partnerships is really not just about local government partnerships. It's really about a whole of city approach to the partnership. And this is where that dimension can come in. And a final point is around monitoring and reporting. SDG localization is also about taking indicators down to the lowest level, you know, decentralized, disaggregated data, but also some indicators are just not conducive to be collected at the local level. So developing an indicator framework, I know the JRC is doing a lot of work on this. We're doing a lot of work on this with the urban monitoring framework. The OECD has the territorial indicators that you talk about. So really talking about taking those indicators down and allowing cities to see which other cities have used them, where are the bottlenecks, which is the data that is not available, and how do you tweak? I think the real skill is in how you tweak a framework that you've been given to suit your context. And I think for all of those reasons, this framework of city-to-city partnerships with national and international facilitation and support is absolutely fundamental. I can leave it there for now, and then we pick up on more later.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Shipra. And I think many of the building blocks that you emphasized, using the SDGs as a tool to revisit how we plan, how we budget, the need for data indicators, the importance of monitoring and evaluation, have been somehow captured by the high-level draft principles that Francesco introduced earlier today. But we'll go back to them with the second round of the panel and have a more deep dive at some of the comments you may have as panelists on the draft as it currently stands. Before that, maybe we'll take a few questions I've seen in the Q&A, and the first one would be for you, Christine Moreau from France. There's a question about poverty reduction and the work you're doing through city-to-city partnerships on that front, and in particular, how France is dealing with refugees and notably their access to jobs. Are these dimensions that are captured in the types of partnerships that you are overseeing and looking at?
Well, it may be. First of all, I'd like to mention that according to the OECD rules, the local governments are declaring the help they give to the refugees, help for refugees themselves, or maybe scholarships for students from countries which are developing countries. This financial support is registered in the ADP declaration of local government, and there are also international cooperations which are led by some French local authorities in countries in which there are many refugees or displaced persons, and this creates a burden for the local authorities of the respective countries. So there can be cooperation projects on these topics.
Thank you very much, Christine. Indeed, we've been through the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD and the Regional Development Policy Committee tracking this official development assistance that is extended through local and regional governments in DAC countries. We know that 13 of the 30 donor countries actually provide such a granular data and monitoring, and that allows to capture the essence of projects that are channeled through local and regional governments. Probably more could also do so. This is a plea for increasing reporting indeed on that front. Thank you for this. And I'll now raise a second question that comes from the chat, and that's for you, Ime. If you foresee, or to which extent do you see the levers of your previous report, the 2019 report, being included or shaping or inspiring the narrative that you're thinking for the next report, the 2023, and maybe if you can remind us all what these levers were for those that may not have seen the 2019 report. Ime, very briefly.
Yeah, well, as I said, we are exploring what is known from research on the application of the levers, and the levers are science, technology, and innovation policies, economic and fiscal policies, individual and collective action, and the fourth one is simply called governance. So you see that they are broadly framed, and And I think all the previous speakers have spoken of many of them, but I think STI was not so much mentioned. And I think that has to do with the level of government we're talking about here. But our idea is to report what is known about the use of the levers, and probably maybe also what is known about the non-use of the levers, right?
Good. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll ask the next one to you, Shipra. There is a question on why cities and regions which are closer to citizens are not more involved in international negotiations and in sub-regional integration. I'm sure you'll tell us that this is already the case and it can be more. And particularly, there's a question on Mercosur and EU, but I think any kind of regional level evidence you bring will be useful here.
Yes, okay. But I want to take it at a global level first. You know, we're the Secretary General, the UN Secretary General, I should say, since we are also with OECD, the UN Secretary General has made a very strong commitment to inclusive multilateralism being, you know, a way of doing business for the UN in the future. And that really means bringing a lot more stakeholders around the table, and it means bringing local and regional governments around the table in terms of international negotiations, in terms of international work and working together. One of the ways we're doing this is through revamping of what is called the Local 2030 platform towards the Decade of Action, which will combine a lot of you know, national governments, local governments, and other stakeholders really to look at how you can take this this localization and the entire international development agenda down to the local level and to the grassroots. It is happening at regional levels. I think there are mechanisms, particularly through the regional forums on sustainable development in every region, which are led by the UN economic commissions, which really bring together a lot of actors around the table in terms of decision making. What are the priorities? They put the cases of, you know, they put a lot of emphasis on a dialogue between ministers and local actors, national governments and local actors. It also happens through regional level urban forums. And of course, it happens through our Global World Urban Forum as well. But in terms of really international, having a seat at the international table, that is very much a centerpiece of the Secretary General's second term in terms of inclusive multilateralism. So I'll leave it there. And I think we are all watching this space.
Thank you, Shipra. Maybe Nicole on this or any of the other questions, and then we move to the second round.
I would just add from a national donor perspective that we also, of course, include in the planning and in the government-to-government negotiations multi-actors. So there is country planning preparations, including stakeholder meetings, where municipalities, federal states, as well as civil society actors are participating. And of course, at some point, talking about every municipality as we're growing, we cannot have 500 mayors sitting at one table if we're getting to presence meetings again. So the service agency, SKIW, will also represent, in the German case, the voices of German municipalities and their partner in the global south. So this is this we see as a very effective way to integrate, but also, of course, giving a certain space to still be independent and not just let's say aligned in the wider sense, but not as a full one program coming from top, but really leaving also some bottom-up planning possibilities. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Nicole. Maybe the last question that I've just seen on the Q&A will be for you, Marlene, from the European Commission, DG for International Partnerships. There's a very concrete question on whether a country that is not a member from the European Commission can join this city-to-city program that you mentioned. Maybe if you can elaborate a bit more on where you stand, whether you're still welcoming applications or not. You said this is not meant to last over time. We will go back to partner countries for the next generation of such projects. But if in the current window, and I know you've done a few tenders and calls for application in the past, there's still some leeway for potential attendees to join. Please, in a minute, you have the word. I think you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, we started on 8th of March, and we have basically already passed the deadline, whereby you could hand in your concept notes. So unfortunately, no, for this tender, it's not possible anymore. Sorry for that.
Good. This is over. Sorry. Keep an eye on the implementation of the partnerships that have been selected, and we as OECD will be also working hand in hand with you and your team in monitoring some of these over the coming month. Let us now turn to the second round. We'll put back on the slides the 9 principles that Francesco introduced earlier today, and I think the question for me now is going back to the panelists and asking you please to be maybe we can mute all the panelists, and asking you please to be even shorter than you have so far, no more than 2 minutes each. If you can provide a bit of background on the current structure, content of these principles, if you see anything missing, if you have ideas or tips to mainstream them in the guidance we're providing G20 countries with in the short medium term. This is really an open floor to collect from the panel members any guidance you may have on these, and we will go back to you, Christine, if you wish to share a word or two from the perspective of France.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Francesco for presenting those 9 principles. Actually, I have not the possibility to look at them in detail, but globally, I would like to say that we approve the emphasis put on intermediary level, intermediary size cities, because we find it very important not to focus only on what the big cities do. We have to keep in mind that the inequalities are already high between different parts of and characteristics of territories. And in the big cities, of course, there are more inconvenience and difficulties to implement the SDGs, but there are also more opportunities for the citizens. So it's a question of justice to open opportunities for smaller size cities, if I may say so, and also to relieve a little bit the burden which is on big cities in that respect. I see 1 or 2 things which are very much in line with our principles, our own principles. For instance, the rural-urban connectivity, and also the reciprocity, which is important. And I like to say that the pandemic has given even more relevance to the SDGs and even more relevance to localization of SDGs.
Thank you, Christine. Over to you, Nicole, from the German perspective.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would add on, I think from the German government side, we also commend these principles are very much relevant principles also for our work. I would like to highlight 2 questions though. We are looking very much into the principle 2 at the moment, and have been already for a long time, because with our growth that I already outlined, we are facing also these questions of how do we integrate those amounts of multi-actors at the subnational level, how do we coordinate and how do we harmonize? Because we do have the experience of former times where a lot of actors were doing a lot of development work, and they were not even aligning with partner governments politics. So of course we need to keep an eye on that. And while we all agree that city-to-city partnerships are very important for achieving the SDGs, we will also need to look into one aspect that in German, I will translate it because it's funny, called right pocket to left pocket. Because if we're just moving funds that were originally in the national government's bilateral cooperation, and we're just moving them to the subnational levels, we're probably not achieving the SDGs either. But we need to actually look into how to leverage funds and expertise. I think the expertise is very clear on the peer-to-peer level. And also, like I said, in the German structure, we are very much, the setup is very much useful for vertical coordination, but it also at the same time has its challenges in this structure, because we have quite autonomous subnational levels. So the coordination, even among existing structures, is a very difficult procedure, and there is a lot of resistance to it from the subnational levels, let alone looking onto the other side, the partner country side. So for me, it would be very interesting to also, urge OECD, who has this long-standing experience in talking to donor countries, and now also to cities who act as donors, to help understand what effectiveness principles are and what we need to do to become more effective. Because multi-actors alone will not actually achieve the SDGs. We need to have strategies how we achieve it together and how we leverage resources and funds, and not only divide it in a different way.
Good, thank you very much. Nicole, over to you, Ime. Any inspiration from those 9 principles for the forthcoming report or work you're brainstorming around these days?
Well, let me react to the principles also from the perspective of evaluation work we're doing at my institute on city-to-city partnerships and on cities' action in implementing the SDGs. First of all, I think it is great that the G20 is doing this, is taking this initiative, and to boost learning and implementation at city level, and to use partnerships as a tool to support that. I think that's great, and I will bring that to the GSDR, don't worry, to the team. But I think that we should not only look at partnerships, and we should actually know what is the impact they are really achieving. We made a survey among German cities engaged from different sizes, engaged in city-to-city partnerships. And there what we saw is, or in communal or development cooperation, which is broader than the partnerships. And what we saw was that most of these cities engage in shaping their public procurement so that it is fair and sustainable. And German cities are responsible for 50% of public procurement in Germany. So this is a huge amount of money. And if that is really applying principles of fairness and sustainability, that might have a much larger impact on countries from the south than city-to-city partnerships, especially if that is, and we saw that most of the activities in the city-to-city partnerships focus on education, they focus on culture, and they focus on environment. So I think before, when I saw the list, not only the principles, but the areas where they should be active, this is, I like the areas, but this is very ambitious. And are cities actually staffed sufficiently for facing that? I mean, we do have development cooperation agencies and specialized firms for a reason, So I think it needs more thinking and more to really be precise. What can we expect from cities to deliver? And where do they need to work in cooperation and coordination, that's how I understood Ms. Hoffman, for joining forces. Yeah.
Good.
So
Thank you very much.
Put that into reflection also. Yeah.
Thank you, Ime. I'll give you, Francesco, the final word after Shipra in case you wish to react, but it's my understanding that these principles are indeed being shaped as a shared responsibility across levels of government and not expected to be delivered only through the local or national lens. We'll get back to that. Over to you, maybe Marlene from the European Commission, and you've been very vocal about the need for monitoring and evaluating the partnerships and their impacts. Does this align? There is a dedicated principle proposed on monitoring and evaluation there. Does that hit the mark?
Yes, I think there we are completely in line with what was said before, especially what Francesco said on the Italian presidency G20 principles. We have, I could say, for a number of years now implemented them already, and we also fully agree with the monitoring. And I would also say with my predecessor that me personally also share a little bit this concern that, of course, the city-to-city partnership, if it's just one-to-one, it cannot be replicated forever. So I think that's also one of the reasons why, we have this partnership with OECD to really analyze in a homogeneous way what our partnership, the limited number that we could finance, how and really what they contributed. And therefore go into this discussion that she said before, maybe a local authority cannot do everything. And we will publish that, or you will publish that for us then in a report later on. And we also try to have a coordination mechanism among all those who participated in the call and have basically got the finance, to have best practices who can spread beyond the limited number of those who really participate. So that is our way of leveraging, and pushing beyond, the program as such.
Very good. Thank you so much, Marlene. And over to you, Shipra, the last word on the current draft and how you see the potential going forward. Then we'll ask the audience what you think. We'll do a little Mentimeter poll, and we'll close with Francesco if you wish to say a few words in a minute or two before the next session. Shipra, please.
Thanks, Aziza. And, we've been very closely involved, as OECD, in the drafting and the crafting of some of these principles. But I just want to pick up on two principles. One, what I was talking about before, one on the indicators bit. Very, very, very important that we should really look at building partnerships around the whole issue of indicator mainstreaming and sharing, how indicators are being developed, how indicators are being applied, how they are being tweaked, etc. So that's one. And the other bit I want to address is around resource mobilization and integrating SDGs into planning and budgeting. And I take Nicole's point about, the right pocket to left pocket, but I would like to nuance that. I think, yes, the pie needs to be bigger, certainly, but the money also needs to go to the levels where it is effectively used and deployed. So there is a bit of a mix. There is adding more money into the pocket generally, but the right pocket to left pocket principle is also important, so that we shift the money and the resources to the lower levels. And that can be and that is very much part of the discussion on mobilization, resource mobilization. My final point, and this came to mind when Francesco, you were speaking before, and other colleagues, and also in the discussions in the DWG, the whole discussion around digitalization and innovation is not fully captured in these principles. The pandemic has accelerated this process of digitalization. We know that territorial disparities can either be deepened by digital inequalities or can be overcome by a stronger focus on digital equality. I think looking at city-to-city partnerships also and making a strong emphasis on overcoming the digital divide and supporting innovation and digitalization in this era, I don't think we can talk about any partnerships without that being a central principle. So I'll leave it that for the discussion and for future discussions in the DWG. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shipra. And that's very interesting indeed, because if you look at the indicators that are used to track the progress on SDG 17, one of them is access to broadband and the level of digital connectivity. And I remember when localizing these indicators with cities and regions, we had endless conversations because many of the local and regional governments actually considered this was probably not the best hook, let's say, to assess their level of partnerships, as would, for example, be the share of their decentralized development cooperation. So I think there's a lot there that indeed can connect the dots, and I'll let you think about it a minute or two, Francesco. Meanwhile, and thanking you all for the great insights from the panelists. I looked at the questions, and I think those that are being raised in the Q&A or the chat have been more or less covered through your different interventions, but I would like maybe to invite us all now to interact and seek the feedback of the audience on these principles. And we are going to share a screen where you can have access real time now to a Mentimeter poll where we would welcome everybody's feedback. So you are accessing it in different ways. You can do as I'm doing now and do flash code basically to access the web page. You can use the information that is provided by the team in the chat. You have the link, you just click on the link, and then you have the voting code that you can enter. And what we are asking you there is this question: which keywords should absolutely feature in the G20 high-level principles on city-to-city partnerships to localize the SDGs? So really getting your feedback on the high-level picture and the building blocks, and maybe we can go back to the previous slide and leave the flash code for more of the, we have almost 200 participants online now to access it. We will be sharing the results with you all in a minute, but maybe meanwhile, it's a good transition for you, Francesco, if you wish to react in 1-2 minutes maximum to what you've heard so far, the feedback you got from the panel, the conversation, and when the results are shared on the screen, if you wish to say a few words on some of the keywords that come over. Francesco, you have the floor for a minute or two, and then we close this session.
Yeah, thanks so much to the panelists and the people who have asked questions. Also in the chat, it is really enriching for us, and that's exactly what we were looking forward to, thanks to OECD and Habitat on getting more feedback on the principle. So it's extremely interesting. I've taken a lot of notes. We have to think about it. We will continue dialoguing. On a couple of points made, I just want to say that certainly we do not intend to mean that city-to-city partnership can solve basically the aspiration of SDG localization. What we want to do, in fact, through the compendium that starts with these principles, but the compendium is a living document. The platform would be kind of leading, facilitating, administering a living document that starts from these principles, with others maybe, and will actually update them on the basis of what works. It is the experience of individual cities and cities-to-city partnership to tell us then what are the subsequent policy and regulatory improvement that cities can make, well beyond, of course, cities-to-city relations. So the issue of procurement, like you mentioned, the issue of digital innovation, these are absolutely thematic areas I'm sure will be part of the compendium. We need to learn more. There will be then recommendations out of the work, I hope, of the G20 and the platform and the compendium to say, okay, you've done great work in Germany on public procurement. There are other cities, I don't know, in India, wherever, where digital innovation is taking place. We transform, following the principle, these lessons learned, inspiring best practices into recommendation for others to do it. Others to do it will mean they can get cooperation, lesson sharing from other cities, but of course, the majority of it will have to become independent action by individual cities to then make those policy improvements. So these are thematic areas we hope to emerge from the journey, if you want, from some general principles, they have to be general, into then making sure the platform facilitate lessons learning and sharing indeed. So these are all very, very crucial point that will come again and again on specific thematic areas. Thank you. And again,
very
thanks
much
for that help in making this principle more shared and owned, and we'll keep talking.
And thank you, Francesco, for taking the time to come and present to the stakeholders and the roundtable members the current draft. You can see on the screen some of the keywords that are coming. We let the Mentimeter go for an extra 10 minutes for those that didn't have a chance, and we'll make sure we'll share with you the word cloud when it's complete, so we can do some cross-checking in this consultation phase of the principles that are going to be fine-tuned by the end of July for a discussion within the development working group before the summer break, and finalized by the end of October when the presidency of the G20 of Italy ends, and maybe a few milestones in between to sharpen the text. So thank you very much. We stop sharing the screen, and now it's my pleasure, on time, Raffaele, to hand over the floor to you, Raffaele Trapasso, who's leading the work on the geography of higher education in our directorate, who will have the pleasure to moderate the second part of the roundtable. Thank you, Raffaele, you have the floor.
Thank you
and
very
thank
much,
you all
Aziza.
so much.
Thank you very much, Aziza. It's a great pleasure to be with you, with your community. It has been extremely interesting to listen to the discussion. I'm Raffaele Trapasso, and as Aziza said, I coordinate the work we do that is called the Geography of Higher Education, and I'm delighted to be the moderator of this session on the role of universities to support cities and regions to achieve the SDGs. Higher education institutions are both international and local, so are very good partners for cities and regions that want to implement the SDGs through a territorial approach. We have heard partnership, capacity to manage, complexity, evaluation and monitoring, and I hope that these will be all the keywords that will lead our discussion today. Now, let's start our session with a keynote speech of Maria Cortes Puig, Vice President, Network Program Sustainable Development Solution Network, SDSN. We are really glad to have SDSN with us, as they are the leading institution when it comes to universities and SDGs with their global network. There will be a Q&A session just after the keynote in order to give participants the possibility to interact with Maria. Maria, you have the floor, so please go ahead. You have about 10 minutes. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raffaele, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. I've been listening in previous sessions, and this has been fascinating. So I'm very happy to be with all of you. So achieving the SDGs will require deep economic, social, and technological transformations. And these will include the rapid scale-up of high-quality social services, such as health and education, a shift to net zero carbon emissions, or deep changes to our global food systems. And these are just some of the transformations that we need to engage on. These transformations will need to be directed in order to achieve very specific benchmarks and milestones. This calls for unprecedented problem solving at all scales, so from the very local to the global, and problem solving that will in turn require cross-disciplinary systems thinking and the very rapid dissemination of sustainable development know-how and technologies. And all of this depends on the deep engagement of universities. So universities are the centers of knowledge generation, and they are the knowledge repositories. They educate the future generation leaders, but then they also inspire all of us. Universities are key conveners for local communities, and as such, they can strengthen public engagement and enhance the participation in addressing SDGs. They can facilitate cross-sectoral dialogue and action and multi-stakeholder partnerships. And because of all of these, they have a number of vital roles to play in the achievement of the SDGs. They can support SDG policymaking, they can conduct SDG-related research and education, they can incubate solutions and new businesses. And as I was saying before, they can convene multi-stakeholder partnerships. Let me briefly touch upon how this can be useful and important for cities. We're working to implement these goals in a world that is increasingly urban, with over half of the population living in cities, a figure that, as you well know, is projected to grow a lot more until 2050, over around 2/3 of the population. For mayors and for local leaders that are working to improve the quality of life of their local environments, the SDGs provide a phenomenal roadmap for a more balanced and equitable urban development. And as we've been hearing for the past 2 days, since the adoption of the SDGs in 2015, in fact, many regions and cities across the world have been the ones leading the way on sustainable development. And many are very well equipped to implement the SDGs. But it's also true that urban and regional governments often struggle to drive action on sustainable development due to a number of constraints. This could be a lack or a limited political or fiscal power, the lack of coordination across levels of government, low levels of institutional capacity, and at points, the inability to be a part of these multi-stakeholder partnerships. And at SDSN, we believe that universities can help cities address these. As the world leading multidisciplinary knowledge centers, universities are uniquely positioned to help design SDG focused policies. In particular, they can help diagnose complex and multifaceted challenges. They can clarify, for example, the interaction between multiple goals. They can identify trade-offs and help work through or see what are opportunities for synergetic policies. In many cases, the expert knowledge required to diagnose these challenges is already available, but in other cases, the expertise must still be developed. In any case, what we're seeing is that universities are already working with cities to localize global knowledge around sustainable development and in particular the SDGs. At SDSN, we're seeing, for example, how universities are helping cities address specific technical expertise gaps. No? I was talking to a colleague from one of the city governments that was telling me we cannot have an expert in every single topic that we need to deal with, but we can strengthen those relationships with universities and have them help us via advisory positions. So we're seeing, for example, how some professors are taking a sabbatical to spend a year or 6 months at the city level to advise on a specific topic. We're also seeing city officials moving to universities for a limited secondment to work around a specific challenge and to bring different faculty members to analyze these problems. We're also seeing cities and universities jointly designing projects and applying for grants together. And we're seeing how the campuses are sometimes being used to test solutions and prototypes before they get deployed into cities. So for example, with innovative public transportation systems, or also experimenting via living labs where the community is also invited to contribute and to learn from. University-based researchers are also working very closely with city officials, and Rafael, you just mentioned these, identifying meaningful SDG metrics to help track progress. Examples include the recent surge of interest around happiness and well-being indicators. We described this in detail in our annual report, the World Happiness Report. Throughout the pandemic, there's been a widespread appreciation of the importance of having robust data and information systems to manage sustainable development and its crisis. So this is another area where we're seeing increased collaboration between cities and universities. In reference to data and the pandemic, we've also seen very clearly the importance of educating about and properly communicating about relevant data. And this leads me to another crucial area of collaboration, which is education. Universities provide students with the knowledge, the skills, the motivation to understand and address the SDGs. And through these activities, they empower and mobilize young people, but also citizens to become actors of change. This is an area that has seen a lot of evolution in the past few years. In 2020, we published a guide called Accelerating Education for the SDGs in Universities. This has become the most visited resource in our website, in our resource page in particular, which I think is a testimony to how useful it is to universities. Every year we open, for the last 2 years, we've opened a call for case studies, and we're seeing that there are multiple innovative and phenomenal ways in which universities are educating on the SDGs, oftentimes involving their cities. So specifically on the question of how the cities can get involved here, or how universities can help cities with these education, teaching and learning activities, we're seeing that universities are increasingly using local, real examples and case studies to illustrate SDG learning. Working with cities, they are inviting local government officials as speakers, as visiting professors, and they're doing these challenge competitions, where they encourage transdisciplinary solution projects, often involving students and faculty members. Universities are also providing advisory, but also professional training to build capacities at the local levels. And they are also developing awareness-raising programs, which are crucial to for citizens in their communities. This leads me to the last point I wanted to make, and it's again stakeholder mobilization and partnerships. So universities are ideally placed to help convene various stakeholders. The deep transformations that are called for by the SDGs will need significant levels of consensus. They will ultimately need to be co-designed. Local and national policymakers will need to understand all of the angles to make sure that no one is being left behind. Universities have the expertise, the independence, the social trust, and a long-term perspective, and this puts them at a unique position to convene multi-stakeholder processes and consensus building. At SDSN, with our networks of universities, we're seeing how they are engaging their governments, business, civil society, but also groups of citizens in their respective countries, and they're doing it to mobilize them for specific partnerships around the SDGs. But this is not enough. We need to do more of this. And quite frankly, these multi-stakeholder, horizontal, transformational partnerships are not easy. So we're all learning as we're doing. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be here with all of you today, to continue to meet and mobilize this growing community of researchers, leaders, citizens dedicated to sustainable development. So on behalf of SDSN and myself, I look forward to the discussion and to working with you in the near future.
Maria, thank you very much. What interesting keynote you gave, because you really provided a platform for this discussion with all the topics. There are some interesting questions. One that is in particular a little bit provocative, because it's about the capacity of universities, higher education institutions, to engage. What kind of change should they undertake to be able to cooperate with cities?
I think this is a brilliant question, Raffaele. So I will be very honest. When we started this guide that I referred to on education for the SDGs, we were seeing everything that is happening, and we were trying to map out what would be a theory of change for scaling up and really being more innovative, And every time we kept coming to this question of, but really, universities themselves need to transform. It's not just about the specific activities of education or of research. They themselves need to reevaluate how they do things. And so the last chapter of this guide is specifically focused on that. How can universities transform themselves? And the truth is that we confronted this chapter with a lot of humility, because while there are many universities out there that are taking a very, very innovative and very let's do everything differently approach, they are only now started. So this is not an end product that we could present as a case study, but we were presenting cases of universities that were in the process of evolving and of transforming themselves. One of the things that is hard for universities is that these are century-old institutions, no, that have very specific systems in place, and they have them to ensure the quality of the services that they provide that are very important, the education, their independence, etc. So their bureaucracies have some sense, right? And so one of the ideas that we explored was whether having a sort of second operation system could help universities transform themselves. And this would be a group that would have people from different levels of the university, the leadership, the faculty, students, administration, etc., working together to start proposing changes while the university continues to be able to deliver according to their mandate, and slowly but surely start those changes start permeating across the university.
Thank you, Maria. It's not only about space, it's also about time, because there is a question saying what is the pace in which they can become able to engage. Another point that was interesting is more a comment than a question, is that the relationship between cities and universities is not necessarily biunivocal, in the sense that there are networks of universities and networks of cities that can cooperate. Is there anything that you can say about that?
I'm not sure. I mean, look, what I'm seeing is that these is becoming more and more the case. To be honest, I think universities have been working with cities probably for decades. That's the truth. We're not saying anything completely disruptive. But what I'm seeing is that this is happening more and more. It's true that there is no one network for universities and cities, but for example, the mandate of the SDSN networks is not to mobilize universities, it's to mobilize universities to work with their local and national government, as well as with civil society and with the private sector to provoke those changes. So our objective is more on the multi-stakeholder aspect. And again, I mean, let's be very humble. This is not an easy, it's much easier to have those one-on-one transactional partnerships, but these are not going to deliver the kind of change that we want, right?
Thank you, Maria. There are no more questions that I see in the Q&A, and it was extremely interesting discussing with you. As I said, you touched upon a lot of issues, a lot of keywords, and I hope that in the discussion we'll be able to develop. Let me now open the session with our panelists. We have, of course, like in the previous session, we will organize a discussion with panelists in 2 sessions. We will allocate 3 minutes to each panelist for the response, and then we will open a Q&A session at the end of it. Now, I will introduce the speakers, our panelists, when I give them the floor. And I'm now starting with Mr. Johan Blaus, that is Senior Advisor, KTH, that is the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. Johan, many of the issues that we discussed with Madame Cortes Puig resonate a lot with the experience you have in Stockholm. So let's discuss that. What is the role that KTH has played supporting Stockholm with the SDG implementation? Johan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as I said, very much that was said in the keynote resonates very well in our case. I mean, our university is almost 200 years, and since we were inaugurated, we have had a very close relationship with the city, because the very reason we were established was to provide a society with engineers to transform for the Industrial Revolution. We were pretty late in that, and the whole 19th century, we were the core to transform the whole city. And later on, when we developed those extremely successful global companies, we were also the backbone together with the city to provide engineers. And Sweden as a country is very much a culture of having engineers running the country, also politically, more or less. But anyway, so we have a long history to interact with the city. And I mean, the city of Stockholm has undergone a very big transformation. I mean, 80 years ago, it was very, very polluted and things like that. And we have been involved since then with technology development and so on to tackle these kind of challenges. And now, as you may know, the city of Stockholm was the first green capital of Europe, 2009, I think, or 2010. And that was very much due to this transformation for 70 years almost. But as I said, I mean, we have had a lot of interactions with the city. It has been an interesting development the last 10 years, because before the SDGs, the city started to have big investigations about the future. They realized they had so many big challenges that they need to have an alliance more in depth with our university to tackle them. And they made, and they were also engaged very much in the OECD Green Cities program. I think it was 2013 as one of the cases, and also arranged this conference 2013. I think that was the start actually to articulate and broaden from the technical perspective to also include the economical and societal perspective in societal development. So our university has also become the SDGs in sustainable development is more or less in the DNA now, and we know that the students are very, very interested, and this perspective is important when they choose which university they should actually study at, and that's one big thing. And since 2014 we have a strategic partnership with the city, and it's very clear that more and more orientation about this topic that this is discussed these 2 days, and I mean the keynote is very spot on several things that I think we should explore even more, and we can come back to that with some challenges and so on. But I can mention 2 projects that we have. We have what is called strategic innovation programs in Sweden, and we coordinate the largest one. It's the name is Viable Cities, and in that case, so Asia University is coordinating that. In that case, they have arranged a climate city contract where the city of Stockholm has been instrumental to design it, and it's I think it's 8 cities in Sweden and 4 national agencies that signed this climate contract, and that is one way to bench learn, but also how to engage the universities together with the city. So I think I have my 3 minutes now.
Thank you. Thank you, Johan. Let's stay in the north, but on the other side of the Atlantic, because we have with us also Monsieur Denis Gauvreau, Director of Innovation and Business Management at the Polytechnique de Montréal, Canada. Denis, thank you for being with us this morning. It's relatively early for you. What is the role that Poly Montreal has played supporting Montreal with SDGs? So the same question I asked Johan.
Well, good morning from Montreal. Listen, I thought I would give you a couple of examples of projects that we have with the City of Montreal. Very practical examples, very much beyond the metaphors. I want to be very concrete here. So Polytechnique Montréal is an engineering school only, nearly 10,000 students, It's the elite 150 years we're celebrating in 2 years. Examples. Out of $100 million worth of research per year at Polytechnique, that is grants and industry contracts, the City of Montreal is our #1 contract partner, okay? Year after year. So one example is, for instance, a number of projects on water, i.e., for instance, source protection, of course, water treatment, disinfection, biological treatment, filtration, distribution systems, and so on. That's one example. A second example, which is a pretty large group at the University at Polytechnique, is the topic of mobility. So transportation engineering, so to speak. So modeling of interaction between urban travel behavior and spatial dynamics, modeling of the journey time and traffic congestion on the road network, alternative modes of transportation, that is ride sharing, card sharing, and so on. And of course, interactions between travel behaviors and public health. Another example pertains to groundwater contamination and its filtration processes, its soil improvement, so to speak. And more recently, a number of projects on security, cybersecurity, which to a city, of course, is crucial. And in 2020, last year, we have created, Polytechnique has created the Institute of Sustainable Engineering and Net Zero Economy. The first platform relates to CO2 capture and conversion. And this is a platform which is on the east side of the city of Montreal, which we call Montreal East. And we've, with the help of the city of Montreal, we are now connecting with a number of companies, industrial concerns in Montreal that are producing CO2. So the city, and I'll stop here because I'm almost done with my 3 minutes. The city to us is today our #1 partner outside federal and provincial grants.
Thank you, Denis. And this is very much in line with what Johan said about being a source of capacity and technical competences, data analysis, and so on and so forth. So empowering really the city. Now let's fly over the continent and switch ocean, because we go to see Mr. Erin Bromagim, who is Director of Olympic and Paralympic Development at the Hilton Fellow on the SDGs at the City of Los Angeles, United States. Now, Erin, we should apologize with you because it's very early for you, and we are very, very thankful for your participation. Erin, could you please illustrate the experience of Los Angeles with the voluntary local review that you have done with the direct involvement of the university students? What is this experience from the perspective of a local authority? Please, Erin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone at the OECD for inviting me to join you today. So we're in the middle of our second VLR right now, and the process has been somewhat different than the first one, but it's been amazing to see the growth in the movement of cities reporting directly to the UN, and we're really excited to be a part of that. I think if I could for just a moment, I'll talk about kind of some of what is in our second VLR and how that connects to our university work and our partnerships there. And that's that we have, especially I think over the past 15 months of COVID, really understood that cities play a key role in the work of development at home. And in the US, often we take that to mean something else, like it's something that either happens far away or it means fundraising, but it's actually what we do every day. And so what I think we've seen through COVID is the importance of how a resident's lived experience impacts how they are able to receive the city services that they need. And so this idea that we need to better understand the journey that our neighbors face, whether that relates to housing or food insecurity or access to healthcare or transportation, is really one of the places that we chose to focus our 2021 voluntary local review. And this is where our universities really, really help us. So it's important for me to start by saying that when I came into this job, I was lucky enough to have a partner in Sanjeev Kagram, who was then at Occidental College and is now Dean at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. And we have expanded beyond Oxy and ASU to include an additional 3 to 4 universities, depending on how you count. We've now worked with over 160 students across 5 partner institutions. And that's really become a key foundation to all of what we do with respect to the SDGs in LA. I want to just say that a credit to my partner in all of this is Angela Kim, who's on the call as well, and she helps lead all of this work with me in LA. So over the past 4 years, these collaborations have taken about a couple different shapes, but I'll talk about 3 right now. And the first is that we've hosted summer cohorts of students. We've done one in 2018 and one in 2020, where students from all of our university partners come together in an interinstitutional way, form project teams, each of which has a city client who commits to meet with them at least weekly over 10 weeks to guide their work. So last summer in 2020, we hosted 9 project teams comprising 54 students. It was a really massive undertaking, but COVID made travel and a lot of internships really impossible for students. And so we ended up doubling the number of students that we had planned for and doubling the number of projects as a result. And so their projects ranged from working with our Bureau of Street Services to build data layers and a decision support tool looking at equity in the distribution of street assets like bus benches and bike racks, to actually building out new data sources and indicators under SDG 15 that link back to the city's biodiversity index. And that work was led by our Bureau of Sanitation and the Environment. So that cohort model is the first. And the second model is where we work directly with faculty to set up semester-long SDG task forces. And that's really where an entire class is dedicated as a practicum to a given challenge that's facing the city. So this past spring, we've had 4 task forces running. 2 were looking at city level indicators for gender equity, not just SDG 5, but really a broader brush that took a gender inclusive approach to defining new data sources. The other focused on restorative justice in SDG 16. And then a capstone class researched all of the employment through our fossil fuel supply chain in Los Angeles, all the way from drilling to gas stations, so that we could better inform our work on a just transition. And the third model that we use is to bring students into our office as interns and fellows. And this is where they do the closest day-to-day work with us, updating the data reporting platform, research and fact-checking, things like our voluntary local review, and then helping us connect out to ideas and partners and best practices around the world. And I'll make just 2 more quick points if I can about those partnerships, because we've done about 24 projects like this so far. And the first is that these projects are really sprints. So typically you'll have a team for about 10 to 12 weeks. So the projects really have to be right-sized for that amount of time. You can't take on too much, and you have to have a real clear deliverable in mind. And the second is that students are really by definition learning. So they need help discerning what's relevant for the projects that they need to focus on, where things are kind of extraneous to what they learn, and then that bringing in experts from within the city can often shortcut a lot of their passive research with 30 minutes time to explain why something works a certain way or doesn't. And so I think that's really important, where we become facilitators between our city colleagues and the student work with faculty members. I think it just has a huge multiplier effect in terms of the value added back to the city, both in terms of the relationships that we've been able to build and kind of the ecosystem that we've created around this work in Los Angeles, which is, in my opinion, really SDG 17 in action, but also in the value that the students add through their recommendations. And they're also able to really kind of be a sort of heat shield by talking or dealing with more sensitive or maybe politically fraught issues that really any city might face, and having some clear-eyed outcomes that help us think again about how we might do the work. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Erin. It's very interesting to see how a region like Los Angeles can leverage on the universities that are in its territory, and this idea that the cooperation with the council, the region, the authorities is also very helpful for universities to improve the quality of the teaching and learning opportunities for the students. Let's stay on cities, and now we move again to Europe. We have Bristol with us, and we have two partners from Bristol. We have Mr. Sean Fox and Mr. Alan Mcleod. Thank you, Mr. Fox and Mr. Mcleod, for being with us. Sean Fox is senior lecturer at the University of Bristol, so represents the university, and Alan Mcleod is Sustainable Development Goals Coordinator at the City of Bristol. So what is the experience of Bristol in the terms of the VLR from the perspective of the university first? So Mr. Fox, Sean Fox, go first.
Great, thanks very much for inviting us. It's a really interesting discussion.
Thank you, sure.
And a lot of things that people have said resonate with our experience, but I thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about what we did, but also a little bit about why we did it as well. So in terms of what we did from the university's point of view, we tried to serve as responsive collaborators, really, and provide research support, facilitate stakeholder dialogue, and of course produce the UK's first voluntary local review for the city of Bristol. Just a little bit of background. So our engagement as a university with the 2030 Agenda kind of began back in 2017 with a request from an organization known as the Bristol Green Capital Partnership. And that's a stakeholder network with about 1,000 organizations across the city who share an interest in sustainability. And those are organizations across sectors. But importantly, just beginning in 2015, that partnership, that stakeholder network started to nurture an offshoot network dubbed the Sdg Alliance, that was focused specifically on promoting the use of the goals in the city. So this was a civil society initiative, really, from outside of city government, bringing people together who were interested in sustainability to try to help advocate for the goals. So the partnership actually commissioned a report on behalf of the Alliance from a team of our postgraduate students. So this is similar to Erin's experience in LA, I think, but this wasn't the city council initially. This was actually a civil society network. And they commissioned a report from our postgraduate environmental policy students to assess the relevance of the goals to our city. And then that student project led to a funding application between the partnership and my school at the university to hire a part-time researcher and facilitator to support this emerging interest group, the civil society network, the Sdg Alliance. And this role came to be filled by Alan Mcleod, who you'll hear from next. So initially he was working for us at the university. Now he works at the council. So over the course of about 3 years, Alan's role kind of became one of translational research. So he was learning from other cities, attending lots of different stakeholder dialogues with other cities and other networks. He was facilitating local dialogue by supporting the Sdg Alliance. And then he was also sitting 1 day a week initially, and then eventually 3 or 4 days a week with the city council to help them think through how the SDGs could be integrated into the city's planning and evaluation and monitoring processes. And the goals became aligned with what's known in Bristol as the One City Plan, which is kind of a multi-stakeholder devised vision for the city. So when the idea was raised to try doing a voluntary local review at one of our Sdg Alliance meetings, then we decided to apply for research funding from a scheme that has it's a UK government research funding scheme, but it's really oriented towards impact-oriented research. So trying to get things, out of academia and into policymakers' hands. And so we got that grant to produce the VLR, but we also, once we got that grant, that led to kind of a snowball effect, and we attracted the attention of the British Council, who contributed to our work. We attracted the attention of a local law firm who contributed resources in kind to help produce that report. So that initial pot of research funding sort of expanded as people saw that we had momentum and that we were going to be doing the VLR and carrying this work forward in Bristol. So then I just thought before I finish, I'd comment on why we would do it as a university. So what is our motivation for devoting time and resources and effort to supporting the city and to other stakeholders? And the short answer is that as a university, we aim to be a global civic university. And as with the Polytechnic in Montreal and with KTH in Stockholm, our university really was founded to support local economic development in many ways, and to educate local citizens and to provide the skills and the resources needed for prosperity in our region. But we're also a global university. And that's one that is meant to attract scholars and students from all over the world to come together, to learn and to share and to innovate with one another. And it also means that we kind of actively take an interest in global issues and global challenges and with global stakeholder networks. So for us, engaging with the SDGs, supporting the city was satisfying our mandate as both a global university and as a civic university.
Thank you, Sean. This is super interesting. The capacity of convening power, the capacity of mobilize the civil society, but also this discussion of being global and local at the same time, I think are very, very relevant. Okay, so this is the end of the first session of the first round of questions, and we go now to the second round of questions. So I go back to Johan Blaus in Stockholm, and I would like to ask Johan in this question, what kind of improvements he thinks that are needed to allow a better cooperation between universities and cities, councils, to promote SDGs at the local level. Johan, the floor is yours again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rafael. So I think one of the key things is to facilitate for mobility of staff between the organizations, and because in that way you get a greater understanding on what's going on, what challenges do they have, what kind of activities are prioritized, and so on. So really work hard on facilitating mobility of staff between the universities, and not only the city administration, several organizations that you need to do in the ecosystem that you have this. And also long term, I think it's important to have this, to allow for this kind of combi careers, that it's okay to work in the university for a while in life and in the city administration for a while and in the companies sector for a while, because in that, if you do that in the system, it will make it much easier to collaborate. I think that's one of the key areas. And I think it was stated in the keynote, because we need internally at the universities really acknowledge the competence and the activities and the efforts the researchers and teachers do in interacting with the cities and the local level. Because in our case, for instance, we compete globally, but we should be relevant locally, and we need to acknowledge that the people at the university actually do this kind of activities internally. And in our case, I'm the director for strategic partnership, where we have 10 global companies, where the city of Stockholm, the region of Stockholm, and 3 research institutes. All of them are pretty big entities, and we need to, to a larger extent, connect to the small and medium-sized enterprises in the region, because in many cases, the solutions is developed by not only startups, it's existing companies and so on. And we need to, and I think in the keynote it was mentioned the power of procurement, and I think we can do much more, because the city and the region are really powerful entities when it comes to procurement of technology and solutions for tackling different things and different challenges. And last but not least, I think it was mentioned also in the keynote that use the campuses as test beds. And I think the city has the power of regulations to allow more experiments on the campuses, but also to a larger extent use the city as a living lab and scale it up. That's some pieces I think it's important to actually get more power to address the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Johan. And I am always fascinated by the experiences in Stockholm. We had the possibility to work a little bit in cooperation with you and with the other universities in Stockholm for our HI Innovate review recently. And the capacity to generate the trio, no, the association between KTH, Karolinska. So it's fantastic what you are doing, and the global relevance that you can have with your activities. So let's go now back to Montreal, because I would like that the Nigovro answers basically the same question. Could you please also comment on what kind of improvements are needed from your perspective to allow a better cooperation between universities and cities in terms of councils or local governments to promote the SDGs at the local level? Denis, please, the floor is yours again.
Thank you very much, Raffaele. So I'm going to try to walk you through a 3-4 minute reasoning here. So, you know, the city is the proximity partner, or the association of cities. It is going to become the strongest broker with the federal or the provincial or the national government to support SDG goals, number one. Number two, the university, by and large, this is a little provocative, remains a very closed system with a number of people who are free electrons. And it's, I think, important to bring them into the game. The universities are still, as far as I'm concerned, too much not involved enough, okay? Number one. So what is a better cooperation about? It begs the question of who are the partners. So partner number one is, of course, the city that comes with a problem. Partner number two is the university, because it can provide or work on providing solutions as well as training people. Number three partner is, of course, the industry. It's the manufacturer, it's the commercial player that will be the long-term product supplier. And number four partner is possibly some investors, whether they're corporations or VCs. So SDG is coming to us with very complex problems. Engineering, science, technology, as well as social issues. The paradigm that I'm taking is we have a problem, we need to find a solution. We have problems, we need to find solutions. Increasingly, because the problems are very complex, it's a game of critical mass of equipment, of infrastructure, and of expertise, engineering, science, technology, and social expertise. One university does not necessarily, most often than otherwise, will not have all that critical mass of expertise and equipment. So critical mass being the prerequisite, we are thinking increasingly in terms of what the structures that are known as research technology organizations or intermediate research organizations. I call them IRTOs. I prefer the English denomination because they are intermediate. So for those of you who are less familiar with the IRTOs, think about the Fraunhofers, think about ITRI in Taiwan, which is a remarkable success, ITRI in South Korea, TNO in Netherlands, the Catapults in the UK, the IRTs, les Instituts de Recherche Technologique in France. What are they? They are platforms, infrastructure, critical mass of people and equipment. The business model is that 50% of their operation costs and CapEx are covered by the state, and 50% of the costs or the running costs are covered by clients. I think that increasingly, and I'm looking into what a better collaboration could be based on it, we have to think in terms of IRTOs 2.0 that bring together those different partners that I've cited earlier. IRTOs as in, what is the space that provides the critical mass, whether it's 1, 2, 3 different universities, a network of partners that connect the clients, in this case the city, for SDGs, and the universities and the expertise from different universities, of course, the expertise that is required to provide a solution to a specific problem.
Thank you very much, Denis. This was extremely interesting and opens new possibilities to the discussion that will follow, I guess, with the others and with the Q&A. Now I go back to Erin. I have a sort of magic wand question for you, Erin. What you would improve in the future to make the collaboration with the university more relevant and impactful? So based on your experience, what is that you would improve in the future?
That's a great question. I think, my magic wand here is really going to be focused on how you grow and scale these, right? Because I do think our partnerships are already impactful and relevant. So I think the way that we've been able to do it in Los Angeles is because we have dedicated personnel. And I would point to the fact that that's also true in Bristol, and I think has been really critical for both of us to make the progress that we've made over the last couple of years on the agenda. And I think that comes back to really, we need to invest in partnerships. And we say that a lot, but we talk about investing in it as if it's investing in both sides of the equation. I mean, actually investing in someone whose job is just partnership management, right? And actually having somebody there that can broker these two parties together and create these projects on an ongoing basis, oversee them, help grow them and facilitate them, and really understand both sides, right? Where in the university does this fit? Where in the city does this fit? Who do I need to socialize this with on both sides? How do we continue to grow this and move it forward? And I think without committing to that type of actual dedicated resource, that capacity that needs to exist, we're going to continue to see this be very ad hoc. And so I think being able to have kind of that dedicated capacity, have that exist on a broad scale, and then start to bring those practitioners together into that community of practice that we'd love to see around the goals. That's really what I would do as Queen for a day there.
Oh, thank you very much, Erin. That's super interesting because first Denis introduced this idea of the new institution. Now you introduced the idea of the new professional figures. And I think that at the end makes a lot of sense, given that SDGs is the most important thing that we should engage with to have institutions, capacity, and all specific tools to address them. Now, last but not least of this session is Alan Mcleod. Alan, you in Bristol have been the coordinator of the SDGs, and so you are perfectly positioned to see what is that needs to be improved. Again, the same question to you from the perspective of a city that is probably a little bit smaller than Los Angeles, but nonetheless also facing similar challenges and with similar complexities. Alan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Raphael, and thank you for having me today. I think what Erin's just said is essential. That role and a lot of our work on the SDGs in Bristol wouldn't have been able to happen without that position to focus on it and to broker some of those conversations. But that also sits within the wider work that is happening in Bristol and the wider work that I'm a part of through the Bristol City Office. And that, as Sean mentioned, is a focus on how the whole city can collaborate. And I think universities can be really key in that as some of the key anchor institutions within a city. And there's a big opportunity for actually shifting towards delivery through the way that universities operate. And there's a big opportunity for collaborating on key issues within cities, issues like the alignment of employment and enrollment. So universities are key employers in many cities, but they also are key educators as well. And so the way that universities operate, the strategies that they have a big impact on the city as a whole. And they can have a big impact in moving the dial towards delivering on some of the sustainable development goals. And that can be a really key opportunity for improvement. But on top of that, there are also big opportunities, as has already been mentioned, for experience for young people. And many young people and many students have had big challenges over the past year during the pandemic, and the experiences that universities can present within a city by working with city councils to provide opportunities, like Erin has mentioned and like others have mentioned, for work placements and for work experience, can be key in them moving on to achieving success later in life and actually the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's one big area for improvement. I think a second key point is around how universities can collaborate on lobbying and on holding others to account. And that's been mentioned in the chat with the challenge around how do you be a critical friend of a city, but also that's true for national governments and how universities can lobby with local governments for national changes on policy, but also on implementation on the Sustainable Development Goals, and add to that local voice on the SDGs. And on top of that, on how they can leverage business, SMEs, as KTH has mentioned in Stockholm, as Johan even mentioned in Stockholm, but also lobbying on national policy changes. And in Bristol, we've been supported by not just the work on the Sustainable Development Goals, but also work on our carbon neutrality ambitions through a local Climate Advisory Committee that we established. And they've worked quite closely with the National Climate Advisory Committee to hold the national government to account. And I think the last thing I would touch on, and this has also been mentioned by our colleagues in Montreal and in Stockholm, the issue for academics and researchers to engage with some of the really complex issues within a city. And that can be something as complex as how does a city become carbon neutral, which is the citywide effort that Bristol's aiming for, or the city systems mapping and how you think about systems mapping, or lastly, how you can begin to work at a really hyper-local level on community data generation. And those are all things that we're working to try and deliver in Bristol, but actually they're all big challenges that really need the weight of research behind them. And that's something that was already mentioned in the keynote by Maria. But there's a lot of opportunity for universities to put the weight of their research behind these complex issues and to try and take action in that way.
Thank you very much, Alan. It was extremely interesting, this discussion. And I saw that in the chat, there was this comment about the personalization of the relationship. And of course, it's better to have a vice chancellor or a rector or a president that goes well along with the mayor rather than the country. But you know, how to go beyond this individual relationship. I see that there is a KTH. Johan, please go ahead. We have some spare minutes that we can use.
Yeah, on this thing, and it was also a question in the chat. I think in our case, as I said before, we have been working with strategic partnerships now for 10 years. Both in the industry and in the city, it's very much appreciated that we have this kind of structure that Erin is talking about, because then we become independent on who is mayor and who is CEO of the company, because we have a structure, we have a process that's ongoing, no matter what kind of political color you have in the city or what kind of leadership you have in the companies. And in the case of the city of Stockholm, we have our partnership has survived 3 majorities now. The first one was blue, the second one was red, and now we have a blue-green alliance, and all of them really appreciate that we have this kind of structure and process in place.
No, thank you. And this goes also in the direction that in many cities, universities are important landmarks. You know? They characterize, feature the city. But now the change is that they can use the landmark for specific actions, and there is an institutionalization that is important. And as I said, in Stockholm we could see that, and we hope to see that also very soon in Quebec, where we are going to run a study also after the summer. Let me use for personal advantage 1 minute of this meeting, because we are going to create an international network that will be entrepreneurship, education, collaboration, and engagement, ECOL, exactly to bring together actors like you and try to discuss what needs to be done also vis-a-vis SDGs and the relationship with the universities and their partners. Before opening the Q&A session, since we have a patrimony of a few minutes, thanks for being so efficient. First, I wanted to see if any of you has some burning comment that she or he wants to provide to us. And if not, I would go back to our excellent keynote speaker to ask her for a final comment. So speak now or hold your peace.
Can I just reinforce something that Aaron said? And
go, Sean.
I think that the dedicated resource that is a human being who is devoted to trying to translate the goals into action is a really, really critical thing. So I think that's a really super important point. And the other thing is, it was a really interesting point about the politics of all of this. And the thing about universities is they can't move. They're giant employers, they're big landlords. And so whatever party is in power in the city, the university always has to get along with them, and the mayor always has to get along with the university. So in some sense, there's a bit of a political firewall just in the nature of the situation that prevents it from becoming overly politicized. In practice, the goals can be operationalized, or if you want, instrumentalized for almost any political agenda, right? If you want to focus just on growth, you could just say, well, it's, there's an SDG on growth and prosperity, so that's what we need to focus on. If you want to focus on social justice, you can make that the goal that you're focusing on. If you want to focus on innovation, that can be, if that's your priority, if environment is everything to you. So literally every party here in Bristol, for example, can find something in the goals that is valuable to them, which is why I think also they are also insulated from these political winds a bit.
May I add one thing, Raphael?
Go on.
It's mentioned also in the keynote, the power of the education, because in our case, we educate 3,000 engineers annually, and almost all of them will be placed in this city and this region. So this is so important to equip the engineers to understand the SDGs, understand the challenges of the city and the region, so they can address this, no matter where they work, in the city or in a company or in a small company or whatever, because they will be engaged in the development of this city we live in. And I mean it's pretty many people. I mean, over 10 years, it's 30,000 people in the workforce in our city that's actually addressing all those things that we're talking about.
Thank you. SDGs managers, but also SDGs users that you need. The challenge of the students is to support them, because otherwise we dump the problem of the next generation of individuals. Let me now give the floor to Maria. Maria, you still connected?
Rafael,
yes, you please. Yes. Maria Cortes Puig.
I'm here. Do you want me to give the?
Yes, please. If you can respond to all the questions. No, I'm joking, but if you can give us a comment from your perspective, and then we move to the Q&A session.
Great. So I think the panel showed what I was saying at the beginning, that there is a lot happening, that this is not exactly new. What I think is newest is the innovative nature of how it's happening. So the type of partnerships. I could not agree more with Aaron in terms of indeed, we need people and capacity to broker these partnerships, to nurture them, and even to learn from them. No? And I also agree with Sean. I think the question of political change is key, and we work with our networks to make sure that the structures that they put in place can withstand changes, not just political, economic changes too, because we want to ensure the sustainability of these processes, also the financial sustainability. I mean, I think it was a wonderful panel. It was great to hear all of the experiences, and I can only say that I look forward to being in touch with some of you and sharing your experiences within our network.
Thank you, Maria. I see that the Polytechnique of Montreal raised the hand. Denis, 1 minute.
Okay, just 1 minute. So this panel is made of university representatives and city representatives. So the point I want to make is that, and this is also what I was trying to explain through the need to think in terms of RTOs or IROs, second generation. You know, the business world has to be there. The market will, long-term sustainability is the products that are produced by companies and sold to cities and providers of all sorts. So I think that we need to remind ourselves with the fact that it's not just a game of university and cities, it's a game of providers of products as well.
Johan.
Yeah, I just want to add, that was more or less what I wanted to say also, that Denise said. The business side is so important to utilize the innovations, and both to the cities for procurement, but also globally in our case for the companies. And we need to develop more arenas how they work together, the city, the companies, and the universities to develop these kind of things that Denise mentioned.
Thank you. Now, I would say that I officially opened the Q&A session now, that I guess will be also an occasion for us to discuss these points. I don't know if there is any question that is ready to be asked. I see that there is a collaboration with one of the cities featured here, the creation of courses, an SDG-based education, SDGs-based education. Do you have something like that in Montreal, in Stockholm, or in Bristol?
Interesting question. So I spoke earlier of the creation of the Institut d'Ingénierie Durable et d'Économie Carboneutre, so Institute of Sustainable Engineering and Net Zero Economy. And what we realized very quickly in speaking to local stakeholders, and we've actually created what we call the training education axis of the Institute, the market, people, the city, of course, our own faculty, and we hope that this will become part of the curriculum for the students, explaining what sustainable is. Of course, we think we're smart and we think we know what sustainable engineering is all about. As a matter of fact, we as so-called specialists know only part of the picture. And to the layman, I wouldn't say it's a mystery, but education, training has to be an important part of finding solutions for the problems. Because I said earlier that the technical issues are complex. Let's just cite, for instance, carbon capture and conversion. Or I can cite, because we have projects at Polytechnic on this, recovery of rare metals from electronic waste. I spoke about water, I spoke about mobility. They're very complex issues in sustainable development terms, but they need to be explained, they need to be translated, they need to be put into the context, so that the question of education, of training is very, very relevant. And that's where the university can play an important role, either with its faculty or with its research associate or research scientists, or as a host who can bring on board specialists from industry or from government departments.
Thank you, Johan, and then Erin.
Yeah, I want to continue one track that Maria mentioned in the keynote, the role of the university to convene stakeholders. I think that's really, really important, and that's also connected to what Denise said now. And in that area, I want to mention one thing. the importance to actually have an active dialogue with the stakeholders when it comes to develop the education, because that's very long-term processes. Because if we start to discuss now to change the competences of the engineers, it takes about 8 to 10 years before the first engineer is out from the university. So we need to have an active dialogue when it comes to develop the competences and the education and the system for providing this competence to the cities and the societies.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. I was just going to say and emphasize something that Dennis said, which is that you need to have that capacity to broker and understand how to actually shape a project scope to be of the appropriate size and kind of content for a student team or for a university partnership. I think when you're talking about faculty researchers, obviously that's a different dynamic, but when you're talking about students, particularly with a set period of time, it has to be something that students can dig into, learn about, engage on, and then be productive toward within a very short amount of time, whether that is even like a year in duration or an academic year, several semesters, or even like a sprint like 10 to 12 weeks or less. So I think it becomes really important to have a person who can understand and translate that scope appropriately and know where the connectivity exists back to the subject matter experts who can actually continue to shape and then use the product that the students produce, right? Whatever deliverables they create have to be then kind of validated by actual policy experts and incorporated into the city's work. And that translation, both to the project and then out of the project, takes time and takes capacity.
And engineers alone cannot solve all the problems. So the point is that you have to create interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary platforms. And this is always a problem in the current framework of higher education policy and institutions. Sean or Alan, do you want to add something to this point?
Well, I have. I was going to pick up on two things. So one is we talked about businesses, and I agree. And we work. You know, that's just sort of part of our business model as university. So, for example, we've just had a partnership with Pfizer to set up a research facility here to look at vaccine research. We work with a lot of engineering firms in Bristol and globally. There's an Airbus factory here, and a lot of the faculty work on projects that relate directly to that. And there's a joint research facility and all that. We work a lot with business. I think what's been missing a little bit in the conversation, and which I tried to elevate a bit in my initial presentation, it also is the role that universities can play with non-business stakeholders, right? So civil society networks and other kinds of organizations in the city and communities themselves, because at the end of the day, and this kind of goes back to the politics of the SDGs, citizens of Bristol have very immediate concerns, and they're concerned about potholes and the quality of their local schools and the quality of the water here, and all those sorts of very local issues are important. And the global agenda is distant, and it's coming from this thing called the UN, and they're not in my life on a regular daily basis. So people's concerns are very much rooted in the place. And so we really need to be engaging with local communities, because otherwise the politics of this never works. We're not going to get buy-in. It's nice that Airbus is really actively engaged with the SDGs. They were kind of ahead of the city in some ways and mapping their operations against the SDGs. But it's equally important that we help mobilize communities and civil society organizations and provide platforms for them. So we also work with organizations like the Black Southwest Network in Bristol, which is really working to address racial inequality in our city. We work with other organizations that deal with food insecurity. And so there's a lot of other kind of, I think, important stakeholders that we haven't really discussed in this conversation. And I think the universities have a very important role in empowering those other organizations as well and supporting their efforts. And so as I said in my initial presentation, we were very much responsive to a civil society approach. And it was that civil society network happened to contain businesses, but it also contained Bristol Women's Voice, Black Southwest Network, and all of these other important civil society organizations that have very relevant activities and operations that relate to the goals.
Thank you, Sean. This point about local, again, global is relevant. We have discussed this with Johan, with Denis several times, because the problem is that researchers at university, for their career, they have the incentive of looking Harvard in terms of research, publication, citations, and this might generate some disconnect with the local requirements for research. So and is also very hard on the side of the universities, because before was TTO, technology transfer, then there was spin-off, then startups, and now SDGs. But you have the same incentives, the same resources, the same. It's the framework condition do not change very much. Johan, and then Erik.
Sorry, can I just very quickly follow up on that, because this is a really important point, is that our incentive structure as academics is not to do this stuff, right? Because we get judged based on our research income and our publications, essentially. But one of the things that the University of Bristol has tried to do, for example, is to change the promotions framework. So now civic engagement is one pillar of the assessment for promotions at the university. And so that elevates the credibility of doing stuff that isn't going to lead to a publication. It might not lead to a big grant, multi-million-pound grant, but it will actually add to your professional progression. And I think that's really thinking about the incentives of the researchers as well, and why they would spend their time not publishing and not getting a research grant. We have to think about that in terms of motivating the faculty to get more engaged in their local contexts.
Thank you, Sean. Johan, and then Erin.
Yeah, I want to just add to this discussion you just had. I mean, this is really important. I mean, this has been discussed for so long time, how you can actually incentivize. You need to have some kind of global currency in that, because if you develop that too locally in Bristol or Stockholm and so on, then you cannot exchange the staff so easy over time. So this need to be addressed on a global scale, I think, to acknowledge this kind of competence and this kind of activities in the faculty. But one thing, I think the pandemic has been very, it has been somehow useful to engage locally, because I noticed in our case, almost the whole university engaged to support the health organizations and to address the shortcomings of materials and so on. So they really engaged locally what they could do. And then after a while, when they have done this immediate action, they started to design new research projects and to develop knowledge and so on. So the pandemic, this kind of crisis has been very useful to engage locally in our case. And the last thing I want to mention, as you may know, the Times Higher Education has started this ranking of impact on innovation, how the universities address its SDGs. And I think Sean is right there, because in our case, we have learned that here we have a large potential to explore more when it comes to this kind of engagement with non-business side and so on, to address the SDGs locally.
I just wanted to make the point and follow up on what Sean said. So first off, I mean, kudos to University of Bristol for introducing that civic engagement as a part of the incentive structure for faculty, because it's incredibly important and I think lacking from so many. I would also just say his point about civil society and our community-based organizations is well taken. I mean, at this point, it's very difficult to approach smaller civil society or community-based organizations and say, you should really care about SDG 7 or SDG 11 or SDG 13. It doesn't translate to the work that they're doing on a daily basis, even though it is the work they're doing on a daily basis. And so I think that becomes really important to meet people where they are in the context of the work. And that's what we've tried to do with our university partners. And I'll give it just a quick example, which is we did a project where we had students look at the kind of service offerings through what we call our youth source centers, which are service centers through which the city contracts with nonprofit organizations throughout the city to provide certain services to youth, help with getting high school equivalency exams or job placement training or anything like that. And what we found when they did that is that because they're community-based organization administered programs, they vary tremendously based on where they are in the city, right? Their capacities are different. The size of the CBO is different. And so being able to look and understand where the city might make investments in how folks access those community-based organizations became like a kind of almost a proposal for a clearinghouse. And that is directly contributing into a proposal that has now been approved to create a youth development department in the city of Los Angeles. And so we can trace how, by working with CBOs and civil society on the work they're already doing, we can help understand where gaps exist and try to meet them there through the city and university partnerships.
Thank you, Erin. Denis, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, So I just want to follow up on what Johan and Sean raised as an issue, i.e. the mental disposition or the availability of faculty, professors, because they're driven by specific metrics. And to caricature, it's a business of raising cash through grants and publications that support progression of a career within a university. So I like that Johan and Sean have restated this, because that is part of my personal argument about the creation of, or the development of IROs or RTOs of a second generation, because the clients, the problems that are brought to an IRO are long-term. They require a critical mass of expertise and equipment. You can't really publish oftentimes because the IP belongs to the client, and that includes, by the way, the city. And actually, you've done a project which was a grant, was a contract, and then you move on to the next one. So the question is, how far can we go with the university equipment? For instance, at the university, at Polytechnique, we have something like 450 million Canadian dollars worth of equipment. Some of it is very sophisticated. A lot of it, by the way, is very sophisticated. A lot of it actually connects with SDG. Quite a bit of it is or remains idle for many hours on any day of the week, and it could be used. So that's what sort of goes through my mind when I think in terms of how can we connect the university assets with a structure which incorporates personnel that is not constrained by the university metrics about progression of one's career within the university.
No, it goes back to governance. Huh? It's a lot of governance to be invented, created.
Governance, and let me add, Raffaele, agility of the research crews, and actually to reintegrate some of what Aaron has suggested. You know, these partnership brokers. I call them in my own writings liaison actors, because we're all, you know, the city speaks a different, I'm caricaturing here, but I'm sure you understand. The different stakeholders actually speak a different language, and they have their own different metrics and their own different institutional constraints. But I believe at the end of the day, there's always a way, a means to assemble those people and come to some form of consensus on how it can be, you know, how a solution can be found for a specific problem and who puts the money.
Yeah, I see that the Sherpa from Bristol is nodding, because we have Alan Mcleod that does this for living. So Alan, tell us about your experience in this last minute. What is your comment?
Yeah, so I think that's what I was going to say, is that it's essential for, in effect, the university to get behind the ambitions of the city, and for the university to actually commit to that. And that's what you see from the example of the civic university approach that the University of Bristol has begun to adopt, and from what we're trying to do with partners. And so the City Council and our team in Bristol from the city office are essential in trying to navigate both the large corporate structure of the local government, but also the large corporate structures elsewhere. And so it's important, like we've said a few times, to have those central nodes of information, or those gateways into the organizations. And for a local government, they can be a really key convener for all of that work, and for how you engage with the different types of organizations, because they have a common interest in engaging with not just the citizens, not just the businesses, not just academia. So they know how to speak those different languages that Denny is talking about.
Thank you very much, Alan. I have learned a lot by interacting with you, ladies and gentlemen. It was a fantastic discussion. I think that we have touched at least the key issues on the table. There is much to be done. Now let me give back the floor to the team that made this conversation possible, and they are the mastermind of this territorial approach to the SDGs, and in particular to my colleague and friend Stefano Marta, who coordinates this program. Stefano, please, you have the floor. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this event.
Thank you very much, Raffaele. Really amazing moderation. In 5 minutes, I will just try to summarize the key highlights of this 2 days roundtable, in particular stress which are the next step that we are planning for this work. I think in particular today in the first session, it was extremely useful to get the feedback from the panelists and from the audience on the G20 principle on city-to-city partnership that we are developing together with UN Habitat for the Italian G20 presidency. I think 4 key messages that it's important to highlight is first, the importance of monitoring and evaluation and impact of city-to-city partnership. This was stressed both by Italy, but also by the several panelists. The second point is the importance of multi-level governance. So basically, city-to-city partnership is not just about city, but it's also about their national government, the coordination between the cities, the regions, and federal government, and also the engagement of the other territorial stakeholders, and in particular the private sector. The third point is the importance of this principle of reciprocity that was stressed several times by the panelists, peer-to-peer learning. So the idea of going beyond this idea of north-south cooperation, but really the idea that both the cities in the north and the cities in the south can learn from each other. And finally, as it was stressed by UN Habitat, something that maybe we need to strengthen more in the principle is the importance of digitalization that emerged in particular with the COVID-19 crisis. From our side on this specific topic, we will continue to work closely with the Italian G presidency to finalize the principle. And we are also going to leverage on a project that we are currently developing with the European Commission that focuses in particular on the evaluation framework to assess the impact of city-to-city partnership to the localization of the SDGs. In this second session, I don't want to really try to summarize the key highlights because you already, it was so rich the discussion, but I think SDSN really highlighted the key role of university for localizing the SDGs, and also their very important network of universities in most of the countries, how they are really contributing and how the city dimension is becoming more important. From Stockholm, we learned also how the SDGs are becoming more and more in the DNA of a university curriculum, and how students are choosing the university also based on this, and the importance of university to work on sustainable development to go beyond political cycles. I think with Montreal, we get very concrete example on how the university can help the city to implement a sustainable development project. And it was also stressed the importance of including more university in this SDGs discussion. LA, I knew already from hearing, but it was really key also to learn how the students first help the local government in developing the first voluntary local review, and how they are engaged in the second voluntary local review, in particular in the monitoring of the goals. And finally, Bristol was really interesting to have both perspectives together. And also I think what was interesting is that everything started from a civil society network. So not just by the local government, but how civil society can really start this process. This of university and SDGs is another area where we really would like to continue working. So together with Raffaele and this big program on the university and higher education, we will try to strengthen this area of work in our program. Yesterday, we really discussed, the focus was very much on the SDGs and as a tool for recovery in cities and regions. And we presented the preliminary result of the survey with the Committee of Region, and it was stressed, for example, that 60% of local and regional authorities believe that the COVID pandemic has led to more conviction that the SDGs can help take a more integrated and holistic approach to the recovery, and that 44% have not used them before the pandemic, but are planning to use the SDGs in the recovery from COVID-19. And we had example from Helsingborg, Strasbourg, Rhine-Neckar, and Eurocity on how this is happening on the ground. We will continue working on SDGs for COVID-19 recovery. We are going to really exploit the richness of this survey that we did with the Committee of Region, because we are pre-producing, yesterday was just first highlight. We are going to produce a policy paper presented at the European Week of Cities and Regions and at our Regional Development Policy Committee. We are also going to continue working with our pilots. We have 2 new pilots in the program, Rhine-Neckar and Strasbourg, that presented their experience yesterday. We are going to launch soon the new pilot report of the city of Moscow by September at the latest, in addition to the 3 that we launched yesterday of Cordoba, Kitakyushu, and Paraná. By the end of the year, we are going to organize also the 5th OECD Roundtable of Cities and Regions for SDGs, where we can continue this discussion on COVID, city-to-city partnership, the role of university, and perhaps also something on the role of youth that is becoming a priority also for us. In this last 30 seconds, I just really would like to thank all the speakers of today and yesterday roundtable. I really would like to thank the audience for being so active in the chat and the Q&A, the moderator, Raffaele, and the OECD team, in particular Aziza, Lawrence, Aline, Claudia, Lucy, and for the key support that they provided to organization of the roundtable and also to the program more generally. And final word for the thank you for the Committee of Region team with the Director Thomas, Audrey, Lucia, and Katia, because it has been, this is just one of the milestones of our collaboration, but we have been working together on SDGs and city for almost 3 years, and it's always a pleasure to organize events and analyze how the SDGs can help cities and regions for implementing the SDGs. Again, thank you very much to all of you. We can continue this discussion through social media and our website. So I conclude here the 4th OECD Roundtable of Cities and Regions for SDGs, and I look forward to seeing you at the latest at the 5th Roundtable of Cities and Regions for SDGs. Thank you very much to everybody, and have a good day.